Welcome everybody to our monthly Money Life webinar. I'm Jim Allen. I'm President and Chief Financial Planner here at Anchor Bay Capital. With me presenting this evening is Blake Pinion. Blake is one of our lead financial planners as well as one of our tax specialists. Blake's a certified financial planner and also an enrolled agent. And he'll be discussing some of the cash flow strategies this evening. So maybe a little housekeeping. This is being recorded, so you'll be able to go and watch it on our website, or if you miss some of it or you want someone else to catch it, you can catch it on our website. It'll probably be posted in 2 or 3 days. We're more than happy to take any questions, so we'll take those at the end. So if you have them, you can just pop them into the Q&A tab on the website here. And with that, let's go ahead and get going. So what we're going to cover tonight is we're going to focus on cash flow in retirement. So, we're not talking about saving for retirement and building up your nest egg. What we're talking about is you're getting there. You're really close to retirement, or you're in retirement. So what can we do to make your money last as long as possible and keep it as safe as possible? So that's kind of what we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about some of the risks in retirement. Then we'll get into cash flow strategies. Blake's going to go in detail about all the various types of strategies that we use. I'm going to talk about how you can maximize Social Security to increase your benefits. We'll talk about how tax diversification can put more money in your pocket. And then we'll just briefly touch on home equity and how to use home equity in retirement. We've got a couple other webinars that you can go back and watch that focus entirely on home equity, and then we'll open it up for answers and questions. So, first, the concept of retirement, it's not what it used to be. I mean, we probably, we're all of a certain age here. And so we were probably, taught that at age 65, you retire and, you go play golf and garden and things like that. And that was fine when people were living to 70, but life expectancy is substantially longer now. We're going to talk about that. So retirement doesn't look anything like it used to. For a lot of people, it's, hey, I'm going to just go do something else, follow a passion project. I'm going to work part-time. I'm going to have some kind of side gig. Lots of different ways to accomplish retirement these days. And retirement is now, 25, 30 years long, where it used to be, 5 to 10 years long. So totally different approach than what we used to do in terms of planning for retirement. And the whole concept starts with what your vision is for retirement, what your dreams and wishes and wants are, and then it's our job to design a spending plan that helps you accomplish those. So one of the ways we like to look at this, and I know some of you have probably sat through our Social Security presentation, so some of this will be a little bit of a duplication for you. We apologize for that, but we think this is important. So, when we're looking at retirement, one way to look at it is it's kind of like climbing a mountain. So there's 2 phases. There's the getting ready for retirement, saving for retirement, what we call the accumulation phase, which is when you're climbing up that mountain. And then at some point, you're going to reach that peak. You're going to achieve your goal. You're on the top of the mountain. That's only half the journey. You still have to come down the mountain. And that's the distribution phase. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is how do we do that most safely and minimize as many risks as we can and make your money last as long as possible while still helping you achieve your goals and dreams. So, when we look at this from, our standpoint as financial planners, the accumulation phase is easy. It's keep you on the path. It's slow and steady. We keep nudging you up the hill. Put money in your 401k, put money in your Roth IRA, pay down your debt. All of those kind of things. And a lot of the focus is on just building the nest egg, and that involves proper asset allocation. It's making sure you're properly diversified and we're putting money away systematically, things like that. So the job really is pretty easy. So obviously we're here to guide you on that path and keep you moving towards your goals. And eventually you're going to reach the top. And this is a photo of my son and I, Brandon, on the top of Mount Whitney. And I know some of you may have climbed Mount Whitney. So if you're not familiar, the claim to fame for Mount Whitney is it's the highest mountain in the continental United States. So in the lower 48, that's the big dog. And from the front there, it looks pretty imposing. It can look kind of scary. The reality is it's a hike. It's 22 miles round trip, so it's not an easy hike. And the air is super thin, and you could see this picture was taken in September, early September, and there was already snow on the ground. So there's some obstacles, but just like climbing something like Mount Whitney, at some point you're going to reach the top of that mountain, and then you've got to figure out what the heck you're going to do. And that's where the tricky part comes in, because that's only half the journey, as I mentioned. And this picture is Mount Everest, which is twice as high as Mount Whitney, the tallest mountain in the world, 29,000 feet. So it's literally twice as high as Mount Whitney. And for a mountain climb like Mount Everest, half of all the injuries and deaths occur on the way down after they've successfully reached the top. A lot of reasons for that. The adrenaline rush, falls off. You run out of oxygen, storms come in. There's lots of reasons why people make it to the top, but they don't make it down successfully. And it's the same way in retirement. There's lots of extra risks that you're going to incur in retirement or as you near retirement that you don't have during that accumulation phase. And that's what we're going to talk about, is what those risks are, and then strategies to minimize those risks or eliminate those risks. So these are kind of what we call the big 5 retirement distribution risks. These really aren't a huge concern while you're accumulating. But now we've gone from building the nest egg to preserving it and distributing it. And so these risks, we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about each of these: taxes, inflation, market risk, market volatility. We've certainly experienced it this year. Longevity is a big one, and then healthcare events. And so we have to, when we're looking at your retirement distribution plan, we have to take all of these into account and make sure that we're addressing each of these risks. And for each of you on the webinar, those risks are going to be specific to you. Depends on your health and your family history in terms of longevity, your tolerance for risk, your income level, all kinds of things. So we're going to start with taxes. I think probably many of you know that we focus heavily on tax planning here at Anchor Bay. And so just a quick show of hands, how many of you think taxes are going to go up in the near future? Okay, so quite a few, almost half. How many of you think they're going to go down? Okay, 1. And how many of you have no idea? I'm in that camp, as is Blake. We don't know what taxes are going to do, but what we do know is that they change constantly. Anymore, on average, about every 4.5 years, we get tax law changes. I mean, in 2017, we had the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, the last really major legislation. The Trump Tax Act is what it was typically called. And then during COVID, we had several other pieces of legislation. And so kind of the point is tax rates change constantly. And so it very well could be first couple of years in retirement, you're in a lower tax bracket. The next couple of years, you're in a higher tax bracket as these things change. And so it's really become very uncertain. And let me just show you an example of what tax brackets have done over the last several years. So here's 1950 to 1986. And 1986 is when we had, the last very large tax law changes, the Reagan Tax Reform Act of 1986. You can see prior to that, the top bracket was 84, 91, 92, 91. Then it dropped down into the 70s. And then finally with the Reagan Tax Act, it dropped to 50, which is still, in relation to those others, it's almost half, but it's still high compared to where we are today. And you can see what those bottom brackets were. Then let's look at up into the Trump Tax Act. You could see the brackets dropped down to 31, 35, and then they kind of we're at 39.6 for a long period of time. And you can see the bottom brackets have dropped substantially from 22% in the 50s down to 10. And where we are today with the Trump Tax Act is we're at a 37% top bracket. So, you know, if you're going to be in retirement 25 or 30 years, who knows where we're going to be along that spectrum. We know that the current tax act, the Trump Tax Act, is going to sunset at the end of 2025. There very well could be tax law changes before then. And so Blake's going to talk in detail about the reason why we push so heavily tax diversification. Just like diversifying your portfolio, we want to do the same thing with the various types of investments you have that have different tax treatment. So that way we don't know what tax brackets are going to be. But the point is, you know, it's probably been drummed into your head that, oh, you hit retirement, you're going to be in a lower tax bracket. And so that's why you want to defer tax till you get to retirement. It's not the reality. The reality is, in many cases, that strategy will end up pushing you in a much higher tax bracket in retirement. Not to mention impacting things like what you're going to have to pay in Medicare premiums, whether your Social Security benefits taxable, things like that. So taxes are a big issue, and we're going to talk about strategies to diversify those. The next one is inflation. So I've got a chart here going back, 50 years or so. And for the last 20 years, we haven't worried about inflation at all. It's been a non-issue. You can see from 2000 to up until last year, the end of last year, inflation was almost non-existent. It was below 3% the entire time. Right now, we're sitting at 8.5%. And it's all over the news, the inflation spike and stuff. It's actually already come down a little bit from roughly 9% last month to 8.5 for July. But it's reared its ugly head in the past. You can see in 1980, when I bought my first home, my mortgage rate was 12%. And so I think we've kind of forgotten about the risk of inflation and what it can do to purchasing power. And that plays into some of the strategies that we're going to talk about. Is they may protect you from other things like market volatility. They won't necessarily protect you from inflation. And we have to assume there's going to be some ongoing inflation in your spending. Now, we don't typically assume you're going to have 8.5% inflation for the next 30 years. We'll typically keep it around 2.5%, because yes, prices may go up, but as you get older, your spending is going to drop. You're going to be driving less, you're going to be buying fewer clothes, all of those kind of things. So that, cost of living will go up, but your spending more than likely will actually decline during retirement as you start to age. Okay, next one's longevity. So I haven't updated the numbers for the last year or so, but in 2019, we had 90,000 people that are age 100 in the US. Now, ladies, that 72,000 number are you. The 18,000 number are males. So by a 4-to-1 ratio, essentially, women live to age 100 much more frequently than males do. And that trend is only going to continue. So let's look at what is projected to be, 30 years from now. In 2054, there's going to be 600,000 people that are age 100. So the probability that you're going to live, well into your 80s and 90s is very realistic. Now, do we assume everybody lives to age 100? No, that's not realistic either, and I don't think that's fair. Because if we're assuming you're going to live to age 100, you're probably going to be spending less to make your money last longer. So we have realistic discussions about, what's your personal health history? What's the health history of your parents and your siblings and grandparents? And we're going to ballpark it. So we're typically going to be conservative unless you tell us you've got some health issue that's going to shorten your life expectancy. And we'll probably, assume somewhere in the early 90s. Because I've been doing this 30 plus years, and what I see is if the numbers work out to about 90, they don't all of a sudden fall apart closer to age 100. As I mentioned, your spending will fall off a cliff as you start to age. But this is something we definitely have to plan for. If you're going to retire in your 60s, you're going to have a 25-year retirement minimum. So we have to plan for some kind of longevity, and that works into your spending plan. Next one's healthcare risks. I've got some numbers up here about You know, the cost of healthcare, Fidelity, the investment company, does a study every year of a typical 65-year-old couple, and they'll spend, according to Fidelity, roughly $280,000 for healthcare premiums and co-pays and deductibles and prescription drugs and all that. Doesn't include the cost of, say, a nursing home or assisted living. That number there is right below that. $7,600 a month is the average for a nursing home. And what I've seen in my experience is, once you get to Medicare, assuming you don't have a very, very high income where you're subject to the surcharges, you're probably going to see your medical costs decrease. If you properly get a supplement that covers most of those copays and deductibles, I kind of disagree with Fidelity's assumption. What I see is typically, you may be paying $800 to $1,000 a month for healthcare coverage now while you're working. And if you go onto Medicare at 65 and you get a good supplement, that number could be cut by a third or more. But it's something to be aware of. If you have a large health event, do we have proper coverage for it? Do we have to go into a nursing home? We need to stress test your spending plan for home health care, nursing home, assisted living, all those kind of things. So the biggie, and the one most of our spending strategies revolve around, is how do we eliminate market volatility? So where you're really vulnerable to market volatility is what we call the retirement red zone. That's the 5 years right before retirement and the first 5 years into retirement. So that 10-year span, you're really subjected to something called sequence of return risk, which can devastate your retirement spending plan in a big way. So I'm going to show you an example here. So we're going to use Bob and Joan. They've got $1 million nest egg. They're going to spend $50,000 a year to start, so roughly 5%. They're going to give themselves raises for inflation. They're investing in your typical, balanced portfolio, about 60% in stocks, 40% in fixed income. We're going to assume they retired in 3 separate decades. They retired in 1980, they retired in 1990, they retired in 2000. We're going to go out 10 years. So we're going to go that whole decade of when they retired, and we're going to see what they have left in terms of their nest egg. And so if they retired in 1980, not only did they not spend down any of their nest egg, that $1 million grew to 1.7 million, even taking into account they were pulling $50,000 plus a year out. If they retired in 1990, it's even better. They actually have $1.8 million left over. And again, they've pulled out a minimum of $500,000 from this portfolio. However, if they retired in 2000, not only do they not have any of the money left, they're actually short about $472,000. So all the assumptions are the same portfolio, the same time frame, the same numbers, etc. The only difference is what was the return for that 10-year period. And you can see if you retire at the wrong time, you could potentially go into a spiral in what we call sequence of return risk, and your nest egg could be gone. So let me show you an example here. So here's 1980 to 1999. So this is the first 2 scenarios: retiring in 1980 and retiring in 1999. You can see what the stock market did. I mean, it went up like a rocket ship. Right here is 1987. That's when I just had been in the business a year or two. And you can see that was the big stock market crash in 1987. It was a blip on the screen. Yes, it was the largest drop in history, and it still is, but the duration was super short. And you can see for the rest of those decades, the market just shot up like crazy. However, you retired in 2000, you just missed out on all of that. And the first thing we had was the tech bubble crash of 2000 into 2002. And so then we finally recover from the tech bubble crash. We get back up to where we started, and then we had the Great Recession, 2007, 2008, 2009. So if they retired in 2000, it took them 13 years to get back to where they started. And so it was just poor timing. So this is what we need to avoid. So during this 20-year period over here, the worst return was a negative 9.73. That was the stock market crash year. And so if you're down 10%, you only need to earn 11 to get back to where you started. Over here, the worst return was a negative 38.49. And you don't get back to even by earning 38.49% again, because you're starting with a much smaller amount. You actually need to earn 62% to get back to where you started. So obviously the market's done great since then. We've run into a little turbulence this year, but this is the problem we need to avoid. And this is where these spending strategies come into play, is how do we avoid this situation where you end up with two large decreases right at the start of retirement that just destroys your nest egg. So how do you avoid that sequence of return risk? It's cash flow planning. And Blake's going to go into a bunch of different strategies that we use. It's how do we get the cash flow that you need for your spending, but not have it exposed to market and to all of those various sequence of return risks. One way we do that is we use what we call an investment glide path. And a lot of people are probably familiar with this. You've probably heard that, oh, you invest more aggressively, and then as you get older, you get more conservative, and ultimately when you get to retirement, you're all in bonds. That carries its own risk. So that's a glide path where you're going from aggressive to conservative. That works okay when you're going to live 5 years after retirement. It doesn't work okay when you're going to have a 25-year retirement. And it very well could be that the glide path is you get more conservative just as you go into retirement. And then once you make it through that retirement red zone, we can actually start to increase that glide path again and get a little bit more aggressive. And again, it all boils down to your risk tolerance, et cetera. But this is where the rubber is going to meet the road in terms of retirement success or not, is how can we create that cash flow and minimize all kinds of those dangers. So as I mentioned, typically what we're looking at is that reduced risk glide path for the 5 years before retirement and the 5 years into a retirement. We're going to focus on these cash flow planning strategies. And then we also use a defensive investing strategy. Scott Spearing, the founder of our firm, wrote a book called The Frugal Investor. We still follow that strategy where it's high quality dividend paying stocks. It's managing cash flow so it's not exposed to the market. So for most of our retiree or pre-retiree clients, we're still following that same philosophy. Not the only model we use, but it's the one that we use most of the time. So Blake's going to talk about all of the various strategies that we could potentially use. And these strategies are all kind of academic theories that people have put into use in the real world. As Blake's going to talk about, these strategies aren't like mutually exclusive of each other. They're not either or. A lot of times we're going to combine several of these, and we can customize your spending plan to your unique needs. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Blake, let him talk a little bit about some of these strategies and how we can mix and match them and incorporate them.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And I think he put it well. We don't prefer one over the other. It's ultimately what's best for you. And then we'll focus our attention on that and maybe pursue a combination of multiple. So the primary strategies that we help our clients with are principal preservation, flooring, guardrails / dynamic spending, asset cycle / bucketing, and then an RMD approach. So the first one is principal preservation. And as the name implies here, essentially you're protecting your principal, protecting your nest egg, and then living off of the income that's generated off of that nest egg, the principal. So to give you an example, you put in $100,000 into the stock market, that's your principal. You would then live off of the interest generated from that investment. So interest generated from the bonds and the CDs from that principal, and the dividends generated from the stock within that portfolio. If you had a rental property, you would live off the rental income checks that were collected. The rental property would be the principal. So the idea here is, again, you're protecting your principal, your nest egg, and then you're living off of the income generated from that investment. But this income is at the mercy of the market. So it could, your income could go down depending on, say, the interest rates in the current environment. So historically, interest rates were higher, then they've been low for a long period of time, and they're starting to creep up. But in a low interest rate environment, this strategy may not hold up well. It actually would require a larger portfolio draw. So to kind of go back to the example of, $100,000 portfolio, let's just say that you want to take $5,000 from that portfolio. If the interest rate from your bonds gets you 5%, then you don't have to tap into any of your principal. But in a low interest rate environment, bonds are only paying you 2%, then you have to draw from your portfolio 3% or $3,000 to kind of fulfill your income need. Another thing with this is that inflation plays a big factor. So in a high inflationary environment, the strategy may not be effective. And that's very topical right now, as we've all seen, because the income that you get from your investments may not hold up with the rate of inflation. So going back to our portfolio in the bonds example, if I have a bond that's paying, let's just call it 3%, but the inflation rate from July is 8.5, then inflation is at a higher rate than I'm earning on my bonds, i.e. I have to tap into my principal. So in theory, it's a good strategy, but there are some caveats.
Yeah, one thing I would just mention too is because of the low interest rate environment that we've been in, that, if you want to use this strategy, you've got to have a big, much larger nest egg to start with. Blake mentioned, if you got $100,000 portfolio and you want 5,000, if you get 5% interest, great. But if you're only going to get 2% interest and you still need 5,000, you got to have, a 2.5 times larger portfolio. And that makes it really difficult to accomplish that. So, some situations, this could work great. You've got more than enough in terms of your nest egg, and you can just live off of, essentially clipping coupons from bonds and things. But with interest rates the way they are, this one is kind of a difficult strategy to accomplish.
So then the next strategy would be flooring. And flooring essentially means you're using guaranteed sources of income to cover your basic expenses, and then using your portfolio, your investment accounts, to cover non-essential or discretionary expenses like travel or hobbies, for example. So when I talk about guaranteed sources of income for retirees, the primary one is Social Security. I'm sure a handful of you may have pensions as well, but these are less common, for better or worse, with the wave of money being poured into retirement accounts like 401ks. So with people that have pensions, when it comes time to collect your money, you're often given a few options to how you would like to receive it. So typically you're given a lump sum option where you can take that whole sum of your pension in one chunk, or you have the option to take some form of annuity, such as periodic payments for your entire lifetime. Your lifetime plus your spouse's would be joint and survivor, or a set period of time, which would be period certain. The way that we look at this is we do a pension election analysis for our clients, where we're essentially analyzing what's the better benefit for the client, based on the facts of their cash flow needs, their tolerance for risk, the interest rate, and some of those other things. But ultimately, some thought should go into this. One caveat with this strategy is that it may not provide inflation protection or liquidity. So Social Security has done a decent job as of late providing cost of living adjustments. So keeping up with the rate of inflation, you've seen a bonus in your Social Security payment, but not all pensions provide this cost of living feature. So if you have a pension that is not getting adjusted for inflation each year, but your basic expenses continue to go up due to inflation, then this strategy, again, may not work as intended. The other thing would be liquidity. So if I'm living off a monthly pension, say of $3,000 a month, and then I have an unexpected health event to where I need $30,000, I may be in deep trouble if I don't have other liquid reserves. So that's why it's important to have a combination of guaranteed income sources and a portfolio to kind of weather if you need a bunch of cash for travel or other type of liquidity event. So we often use this strategy with other types of strategies. So the next one I'll talk about is guardrails. And before we get into what guardrails are specifically, I think it would be helpful to give some context on the 4% rule. So some of you may have heard of this 4% rule. So taking a step back, in 1994, there was this academic, Bill Bengen, who did a research study. He looked at historical rates of returns and essentially came to a conclusion that a 65-year-old couple investing over a 30-year time period in retirement, so living to age 95, could comfortably and safely withdraw 4% of their portfolio and not run out of money. So the analysis considered that they would have 60% of their portfolio in stocks and 40% of their portfolio in bonds. But the general nature of this is 4% is typically used as a safe withdrawal rate. And that may be 5% depending on who you ask. But we don't use this as a hard and fast rule, but rather a barometer to gauge the level of our clients' portfolio withdrawal rates. So when we're doing a retirement income plan, we'll kind of see how much you were getting paid from your employer before you retired, and then design a spending plan to where we're not withdrawing too much of your portfolio in one single year in order to extend the longevity. So that's where we kind of use this 4% withdrawal strategy. And then as noted here, it's calculated annually based on goals. So now segueing into guardrails in particular, the definition of guardrails is as the market moves, as it fluctuates, as we see volatility, your withdrawal rates should move with that. So should reflect the changes in the market. So to give you an example, when the market goes down, we may want to look at cutting your spending, cutting your portfolio withdrawal rate to reflect that now you're taking money out of a lower balance. So your withdrawal rate's actually going up. And then vice versa, when the market goes up, your withdrawal rate lowers because the portfolio has grown. So the theme here is that we're periodically reviewing how the market's done and how much you're taking out of your portfolio to align those and adjust accordingly. So the way I like to generally explain this is, if you're an employee now or if you're an employee in the past, think of it as you're working for your company. So when business is booming, the company's doing well, your employer may give you a bonus, add money to your paycheck, increase your salary as a result of the company being successful, i.e. the market doing well. But in contrast, when the company is in a rough patch, it's not doing well, business slows down, there may be layoffs, they may adjust your salary downward to reflect the condition of the company. So that's one way to think about it. Tying in the RMD approach, so required minimum distributions are imposed on those that are age 72 that have retirement accounts, need to take money out of their accounts. Referencing this to the 4% rule, in a required minimum distributions about 3 to 3.5% of your portfolio. So just taking out your required minimum distribution each year could be looked at as a cash flow strategy, a safe cash flow strategy, so that you're not withdrawing too much in one single year.
Yeah, and just one comment on this too is, this works for the basic spending, but we always have to factor in all the discretionary spending. I was like, when are we buying the next car? Do we have a big trip we need to save for? Do we have a wedding down the road? And so those have to be factored into the spending plan as well. And so, we can use these guardrails and dynamic spending as kind of a general rule of thumb, but we've got to calculate into that equation is, cash flows are uneven. They're not the same every single year. And so we have to make sure we're incorporating those things that are expected in the future and at least ballpark them and include them in the spending plan.
Perfect. So the last strategy that I'll hit on is known as asset cycle or bucketing concept. And essentially what this means is you're separating out your portfolio into different investments that align with your anticipated cash flow needs. So This comes in the format usually of having a short-term or immediate income bucket. As you can see here, that's 1 to 3 years of your anticipated cash flow needs, a midterm, which would be 3 to 6 years, a long-term 6 to 10, and a growth to legacy bucket, which may be money that you're not going to ever touch, used for your heirs. The order of operations with this is that you have your least risky investments, your most safe investments in your immediate income bucket, and the more risky investments in the growth legacy bucket. And there's a reason for that. When we're sending you money from your portfolio, we're pulling it directly from that immediate income bucket. And because we're tapping into that, we want to make sure it's not subject to market fluctuation, so that we can always send you your money and not worry about what the market's doing. And then in contrast with the growth and legacy bucket, it's important that we have equities in your portfolio to, again, outpace the rate of inflation, which is 8.5% right now, and then also grow your portfolio over time for yourself or for your beneficiaries. And you'll notice here that we have a range here, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 6, etc. That's because it ultimately depends on what's best for you as the client. A lot of people have different tolerance for risks and anticipated cash flow needs. Some people don't want to touch their portfolio at all. Some people want to die with $1 in their pocket. So it's client specific. But again, the idea here is that we want to put investments in different buckets to align with your cash flow needs and align with kind of market cycles. And this is going to make more sense right here as I get into the specifics, but focusing on that income bucket first, this is the bucket that we're tapping into to send you your money every month. And that's why it's going to hold cash, typically money market funds, safe investments, 1 to 3 years worth, again, depending on your tolerance risk and cash flow needs. The midterm bucket would be more of short-term bonds, certificates of deposits, and annuities if applicable. A balance bucket may be some dividend paying stocks and some longer term type corporate bonds, and growth legacy would be equities. And again, if you look at the quadrant and you go from income, midterm, long-term growth, you'll see that gradually it goes from least risky to more risky, but then it goes from lowest rate of return to potentially highest rate of return based on the risk reward relationship. But the key thing we want you to take away from this whole bucketing concept is that if we go into another time period like 2008, where the market goes down for multiple years, we have enough in your income in midterm buckets to where we can keep sending you checks, keep up with your income needs for multiple years, and not sell stocks while they're down. So that's the principle. We keep enough in these safe buckets to keep paying you despite what the market's doing. Now I'll pass it back off to Jim to talk about some other cash flow strategies. And you're on mute, Jim.
There we go. All righty. So, Blake just talked about various investment strategies. And, as I mentioned earlier, it's not like either or. We incorporate all of those and we customize that to your individual situation. So, we'll mix and match those strategies to fit within kind of like your tolerance for risk, your cash flow needs, whether they're very uneven or whether they're steady, all of those kind of things. But some other things that we'll do that are important is, one is like, how do we maximize your Social Security benefits? So we typically do a whole presentation on this topic alone, and we're actually doing that next month. But I want to just talk about some of the basics of Social Security. How do we get the most from that and make that work the best for you? So I mentioned at the very beginning, retirement's changed. A lot of people now will work part-time, or they'll start a business, or they'll do consulting or something. And so part of that cash flow equation could be, I'm going to have some money coming in. I'm going to, be a real estate agent and sell a couple houses on the side, or I'm going to go work part-time, or I'm going to consult for my prior employer, things like that. So those are incorporated into the spending plan. Then Blake's going to talk about increasing your cash flow through saving on taxes, because our motto here is not what you make that counts, it's what you keep. And so we can save you a little bit extra money on income taxes or on your Medicare premium, or keep your Social Security from being taxed. That's more money in your pocket. And so that helps with the spending plan. And then we're just very briefly talking to options for tapping into your home equity, because for a lot of you, home equity will be one of the major sources of your spending plan in retirement. So let's talk about Social Security. So Social Security's got a lot of benefits to it. It's guaranteed by the U.S. government. So I know there's been a lot of talk about the Social Security fund's going to run out in 2034, et cetera. That's not going to happen. The benefits aren't going to be cut for us. Now our kids and grandkids may see a totally different type of system, but for us that are in a certain age, you're going to get your Social Security benefits. They're not going to be touched. They're payable for life, so you can't outlive these. This is one of the benefits of this, is it eliminates that longevity risk. And they also have cost of living increases. The cost of living increase for 2023 very well could be roughly a 9% increase. And so they do keep pace with inflation. So you can't outlive it. You don't have to worry about inflation. You don't have to worry about a company going broke. So there's a lot of benefits to it, but there are multiple options for claiming Social Security. We're going to talk about, all the various age ranges that you have when making your decision and how they can impact it. And as I mentioned, next month, we're going to do our full Social Security webinar. So we've got Bob and Joan. They're 66. Bob's getting $2,500 per month. Joan's getting $1,250. So they're getting roughly $3,750 combined. So this is a very typical client. So that is their floor in terms of their spending. So, if we know they're getting $45,000 a year and it's guaranteed for life with cost of living raises, how much is that worth? How much would they have to have in a portfolio of some sort to throw off that same $45,000? Well, Blake talked about that 4% rule, which is a pretty reasonable guideline. I mean, we adjust it up and down depending on the individual situation, but it's a fairly reasonable proxy for how much you can take out. So if we assign the 4% rule to this, so how much do we need to have to give them $45,000 for life with raises? It's $1.1 million. So it very well could be that your Social Security benefit's your largest asset, right up there with your IRAs and 401ks and your home. And the decisions you make regarding Social Security can have an impact of up to 6 figures. And we're not going to go into all the details tonight, but making a smart Social Security decision will certainly save you a lot of money in retirement. So the first thing you want to understand about Social Security is you have what's called the primary insurance amount. If you've gone to ssa.gov and you've looked at your statement, this is the amount they tell you that you're entitled to at full retirement age, which is between 66 and 67, depending on the year you were born. So that's what they expect to pay you per month for your life. And it's just one life only. There are survivor benefits, et cetera, but essentially it's calculated on a single life. And so what you have is you have that primary insurance amount. This is what we're going to pay you. In Bob's case, it was $2,500 a month for life at his full retirement age, which was 66. However, you can take benefits as early as 62 or as late as age 70. And so that affects the amount of money you're going to receive. The way to think about this is you have your pot of money that they're going to pay you. That's essentially what that PIA is at full retirement age. It's like, okay, this is your pot of money. We expect you to live this long from age 65 or whatever. We're going to spread that pot of money out over your life expectancy. Well, if you turn it on at 62, they're not going to pay you more. They're going to pay you the same amount, but now it's being stretched out over a longer period of time. So that means they're going to reduce your benefits. Again, dependent on your full retirement age, as much as 30% or as little as 25% at age 62. So you're going to take a 25% permanent haircut on your benefits. So yes, you're going to get benefits for 4 or 5 years longer, but you're going to give up that extra money for the rest of your life. So the way to look at this is like the 30-year mortgage. If you buy a home and you take a 30-year mortgage, your payment is smaller because you've spread it out over 30 years. The opposite is you could actually delay Social Security benefit all the way up till age 70. And for every year you delay it beyond your full retirement age, you get an 8% increase in benefits. So in this case, instead of having a reduction in benefits, you could get a 24 to 32% increase in your benefits. So your benefit, if you wait till 70, could potentially be almost a third higher than full retirement age. So the way to look at this is the 15-year mortgage. They're not paying you anymore, but now they're paying it over a shorter period of time. Therefore, your payment's larger. And so when should you pick it? This is where it gets really variable, and there's a lot of analysis that has to get done. So if we go back to Bob and Joan, we know Bob's was 2,500. If he turns it on at 62, that 2,500 becomes 1,875. So that's what he'll get for the rest of his life. If he waits till 70, his benefit is now 3,300. So it's substantially more. The question is Bob better off getting 3,300 for life starting at age 70? Or is he better off getting 1,875 a month starting at age 62? Because he's going to get four additional years or 8 additional years, if he's going all the way till 70. So the question is, which is better? And so this is where we can do a maximization analysis, and it's part of every retirement spending plan we do. It's like, okay, how long does Bob need to live for age 70 to make sense? And in this case, the crossover point is roughly age 79. So at age 79, Bob will have ended up getting more by delaying than he would have taken it early. And you can see if Bob lives out to say 90 or 92, we've got a difference of 673,000 versus 585 in terms of benefits. That's almost a $90,000 difference. And if it's a married couple, those differences are even larger. So when I talk about that decision having an impact of almost 6 figures, here's a real life example. So the question is, well, how long are you going to live? Well, we don't know. But there are a lot of strategies and a lot of planning we can do around this. Is like, okay, maybe we're better off taking it early and preserving the portfolio because we have sequence of return risk, or maybe we're better off delaying Social Security and taking that benefit at say age 70 and spending your retirement portfolio first because the market's doing well. So a lot of planning goes into making that Social Security decision. It's crucial to having the right spending plan during retirement. And it's something we always have to analyze and make decisions on. Okay, so in terms of designing the plan, the biggest thing is managing that sequence of return risk, managing that retirement red zone. How do we do that? We coordinate your spending strategies. We're going to delay Social Security. We're going to take it earlier. We're going to use those bridging strategies or guardrails or flooring or bucketing or whatever, so that the money we're sending you each month is not exposed to market risk. The market's been down substantially this year, depending on the index, roughly 14%. If our clients need funds, we're not going to be cashing in stocks that are down 14% to send them a check. We're going to have money in one of these various strategies so that we can allow the market to recover and we don't have to worry about volatility, because that's money we're not going to touch for years, if not decades. But the other component to really maximizing your spending in retirement is tax planning. So I'm going to turn it back over to Blake and let him kind of talk about tax diversification and how that works. And then we'll wrap up and take some questions.
Great, thank you, Jim. So as we've represented your investment portfolio into different buckets, we think of taxes as well in different buckets. So the 3 different tax buckets are the tax-free bucket, tax-deferred bucket, and taxable bucket. So when I talk about tax-free, I'm talking about Roth IRAs, health savings account, municipal bonds, and home loans. So think of home equity line of credits, cash out refinances, reverse mortgages. Tax deferred bucket would be the IRA, the 401k, 403b, or qualified annuities. And then the taxable bucket would be like a brokerage account, a trust account, a joint account, or real estate, like your home. And the focal point from this is that we want to have money in retirement in all 3 buckets, not one. not two, but all three to design the most tax efficient income plan for you. Because we use a combination of all three if applicable, again, relative to your tax situation. So I'll quickly break down the key characteristics between all three. So your tax deferred, your retirement plan bucket, the money that you put in is pre-tax. So it lowers your taxes, then the account grows tax-free. And then ultimately, when you take money out of the account, it's taxable because you got the upfront tax benefit. The IRS taxes you on the back end. At death, your heirs have to pay taxation as well when they inherit the account. And some other key facts about the tax deferred would be if you take money out of this 401k or IRA prior to the age of 59 and a half and don't meet an exception, then you could face a 10% early withdrawal penalty. And then also there's required minimum distributions, which are currently at the age of 72. And that essentially means that you're required to take money out of the account. Again, the IRS gave you the upfront tax benefit, so they're requiring you to take money on the back end. So Roth, in comparison, the money you put in is after tax, so it doesn't lower your taxes up front. The account still grows tax-free, so taxes are deferred. And then when you take out the money, it's tax-free. So since you didn't get the upfront tax benefit, when you take out the money from the Roth, it's tax-free. So we love the Roth bucket. And then at death, your heirs get to benefit from that tax treatment as well, because money that they take out of an inherited Roth account is tax-free. Another key characteristic with Roth is there's no required minimum distributions. And in order to avoid penalties, you need to take out the money after the age of 59 and a half and have the account for at least 5 years. So the last would be the taxable. And again, similar to the Roth, the money you put in doesn't lower your taxes. So it's after tax contributions, but distinct from the two retirement accounts, you're taxed annually on the interest that's generated, on the dividends that are paid out, and any capital gains that are triggered. So when you sell stocks or bonds within the account, you could pay capital gain taxes. So in terms of taking money out of the account, only the appreciation is taxed as a capital gain, and your basis comes to you tax-free. So if I bought Apple stock for, let's just call it $100, and then I sold it at $120, then $20, the difference, my appreciation would be considered taxable as a capital gain. So when you pass away with a taxable account, it gets a stepped up in basis, and that allows your heirs to sell that asset tax-free. So that's why, if it makes sense, we often have people register their real estate and their bank accounts, their brokerage accounts in the name of their trust, and then their heirs get to benefit from the stepped up cost basis. And some final things about taxable accounts are they're liquid. So it's really great to have, especially in those years up until the age of 59 and a half to tap into, because it doesn't have those early withdrawal penalties, and it also doesn't have required minimum distributions. So again, the main point is that we want to utilize multiple buckets, not just one, for the ultimate tax efficient retirement income plan. So let's look at Bob and Joan here. They need $80,000 for their lifestyle. And of that, 45 is going to come from Social Security. So they need to take 35,000 from their portfolio, which is made up of a 401k that's 750,000, and then a Roth that's 250,000. So we'll look at a few scenarios here and then talk about the benefits of tax asset diversification. So scenario one essentially tells us that they take that $35,000 shortfall from their 401k, their tax deferred bucket. But as you remember, money we take out of that account is fully taxable as ordinary income. So as a result, they have taxes due of $7,388, and they don't get their goal of an $80,000 lifestyle needs. So scenario one's not optimized. So scenario two, instead of taking the money out of the 401k, why don't we just take it out of the Roth IRA? You told me that money that's taken out of a Roth IRA is tax-free, will meet their goal, no problems there. So if they did that, they take out the $35,000 from their Roth IRA, they do accomplish their total income goal of $80,000. The problem is that they overdrew from their Roth IRA in one single year. Specifically, they took out 14% of their Roth IRA balance in one single year. And we want to preserve the Roth IRA for as long as we can. So that's why we don't want to take too much of that account. So what's the most optimized strategy? And it's a blend, taking money from both the tax deferred account and the Roth IRA to accomplish the goal of a minimal amount in tax and then not taking too much out of our Roth. So looking at this final scenario here, if we did a 50-50 blend for their distribution plan, took out half from the 401k, half from the Roth IRA, they have a minimal tax liability of $1,350, and we didn't take too much out of the Roth, so we get them just shy of that $80,000 income goal. And again, this is the most optimized strategy out of all three. So now I'll let Jim wrap us up, talking a little bit about home equity and retirement.
Yeah, so we'll go through just a couple bullet points here, and then we'll open it up for any questions. We'll get you guys on your way for the evening. So you have to look at your home in retirement. It's a lot of times it's your largest asset, particularly, in Southern California, prices have gone, skyrocketed to ridiculous levels in some places. So what we have to look at is, okay, what do you want to do with your house? Is this the place you want to live? Is this your forever home? In that case, you're going to age in place. Well, that means it's going to be harder to tap into that cash. And there are things you can do to increase your cash flow by using your home equity. And so just some of the strategies, and again, we look at all of these. Some of them are right for some people. Other ones are better. So things that we want to look at in retirement. One thing that's important to a lot of people is like, I want to have a paid for house. I don't want to have to worry about losing my house in retirement. So, do we plan in your spending plan to pay off your mortgage? Does that make sense from a financial standpoint? A lot of times the finances don't factor into it. It's just, I want that peace of mind of having a paid for, home. Other people is like, no, that I'm not going to sleep at night knowing that I'm house rich and cash poor. Yeah, great. My house is paid off, but now all my cash is tied up into a house that I can't tap into. I'd rather have the money in the bank. So you've got to look at that. A common one is selling and downsizing. You're going to sell this home. You're going to buy a smaller home. It's not feasible to live in the house anymore. It's second story. It's a large home, whatever. And so you could sell and downsize. And then we have to factor in the tax consequences of doing that. Are we going to have any capital gains tax on the sale of the home? You can set up a home equity line of credit that you can tap into. Some issues with that is you got to qualify for the loan, which might be hard to do in your retirement, and you do have to pay that loan back. And then lastly, a technique that's available that is pretty flexible is maybe doing a reverse mortgage, where you have tax-free access to cash. You can use it to pay off your current home. You can use it to buy a new home. We just did a few months ago a whole seminar on how you could use reverse mortgages in retirement. So you can go to our website and look at that. But we have to take into account, what are we going to do with that asset? I mean, sometimes you're just fortunate enough to we don't have to worry about it. That can just be our cushion for if we have to go into a nursing home or home health care or something like that. Other times it's like, we need to do something with this house because that's your largest asset and you can't easily convert it to cash. So in terms of taking control of retirement, we talked about, you've got those 5 risks. You can't control how long you're going to live. You have no idea whether your path down the mountain is going to be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. You have zero control over tax changes. We're at the whim of Congress for those. And pretty much every time there's a change of control, there's now new tax laws. We're at the whim of inflation. And so we hadn't had to worry about inflation for 2 decades, but it's back. And so we have to deal with it. And you certainly have no idea what the future, has in store for you in terms of health events. So you can't control those kind of things, but we could certainly plan and stress test and try and mitigate those risks as much as we can. You can't control your expenses. And so as Blake talked about, if the market's down, then maybe you tighten your belt for a short period of time. If the market's doing great, you give yourself a little bonus, you take some extra trips. You certainly can control your tax situation in terms of being diversified. You can minimize the effects of inflation by investing for growth. You can, you can determine how much risk you're willing to take, and then you can make informed decisions like picking the right time to turn on Social Security and doing proper tax planning, like those kind of things. That it's our job to help you with those. It's our job to help you figure out what you want in terms of, a secure and, a dream retirement. We get to know you, get to know what your wishes and wants are, and then it's our job to put together the plan that gets you there. And we could tell you, that essentially whatever we plan, we put together 6 months from now, it could be useless because stuff's going to happen and things are going to get in the way. So we're constantly adjusting it. That's why we do planning rather than just a financial plan, because it's going to change constantly. The tax situation can change year to year. The market situation can change year to year. So we're constantly having to reevaluate and adjust to the things that are happening in your life. We have access to all the tools in the toolbox. All of those strategies we can use. We customize those to fit your individual plan. This is what we do here at Anchor Bay. This is our specialization, is working with people that are heading into retirement or people that are in retirement. This is what we do all day, every day. And we always act as a fiduciary. So if we're making a recommendation that we should use this strategy, it's because it's what's best for you, not what's best for us. So in everything we do for our clients, we're always acting as a fiduciary. So we're always here available to help you with this. If you haven't worked with us to take advantage of this, we recommend you do. Obviously, if you're already working with us on your spending plan, we're going to constantly update it and everything else. So with that, we'll go ahead and open it up to any questions we have. We're pretty much like right on time. Happy to answer any questions. If you don't want to ask a question right now, feel free to email or call myself or Blake, Jim@anchorbaycapital.com or Blake@anchorbaycapital.com. We're more than happy to have answer your questions or have you come in for a consultation. Okay.
We got one question.
Yeah, we've got a question here about the Inflation Reduction bill. It's this particular bill is focused more on corporate taxes, which will likely trickle down to the to the consumer, as they may take slightly less profits, but they typically going to pass those costs along. This particular act doesn't really have a lot of inflation reduction in it. It's got some good stuff in terms of infrastructure and charging stations for climate change and things like that. But this one doesn't really have a lot of stuff in it in terms of tax consequences. Pretty much the bulk of it is corporate stuff, which obviously affects everybody else's bottom line. We don't anticipate any major tax legislation coming down the pike. There is the Secure Act that we've talked about in the past that may ultimately get passed this year or next. But there'll be different iterations of that. And when those things happen, we'll certainly do a webinar and send out notifications. But I don't think this one really is going to impact their personal tax situation much.
Right. Yeah, it's focused on billion-dollar corporations. So there's nothing targeted at the individual consumer. And there's actually some reprieve in terms of Medicare drugs being subsidized by the government. So I think overall there's more kind of pros than cons coming out of it. And this is being recorded. Someone mentioned to us that the audio cut out for a minute, so we apologize about that, but it is being recorded, so we'll be sure to send it out, if not before the end of this week, then early next week.
Yeah, and then the next one will be, I believe it's September 14th. So it's usually the third Wednesday of the month. And we will be doing our maximizing Social Security. So we'll essentially do a full hour on the ABCs of Social Security, how you claim your benefits, get more into detail about those break-even analysis and things like that. So you'll be getting an invite from us, in a few weeks, but keep your eyes out for that. As always, we appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to this. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate. Shoot us an email or give us a call. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks everybody for attending. We'll talk to you next month.
Have a good night.